and welcome to Crowvane Manor. Wherever you are, and whatever kind of night it's been, you've come to the right place to slow down. Let the world go quiet for a while. Out here, none of it needs your attention. Many of you return to these rooms night after night, and I'm grateful for that. There's a reason you keep coming back. The stories kept inside these walls aren't quite like the ones you'll hear anywhere else. Before we begin, leave a comment and tell me where in the world you're listening from tonight. I always enjoy reading them. And if these stories stay with you, a like and a subscribe help more than you know. Now get comfortable, breathe slow, and let's open the door together.
I had a sleepover at my best friend's place when we were both in our 20s. The kind of casual sleepover that doesn't feel like a sleepover the way it does when you're a kid, but still ends up being the same thing. You hang out late, talk about everything and nothing, maybe watch something on TV, snack, laugh, and eventually you crash wherever there's space. It was comfortable because it was her house, a place I'd been to plenty of times, and she was my best friend, so I wasn't on edge or expecting anything weird. It was just one of those nights where you're tired enough to sleep hard and wake up feeling like you have been dropped back into the world. I slept on the couch. It wasn't in a tucked away corner either. The couch was positioned so that when you lay there, you had a direct line of sight down her hallway to the bedrooms. You know how some houses are laid out where the living room opens into a long hallway like a straight tunnel with doors at the end and along the sides? It was like that. From where my head was on the couch, if I looked up, I could see straight down that hallway without anything blocking the view. During the day, it was just a normal hallway. At night, with the lights off and the house quiet, it felt like a long, dark passage leading to unknown rooms. Not in a haunted way necessarily, just in that way any hallway looks different at night when it's lit only by faint ambient light and your eyes are half asleep. I went to bed normally. I didn't have nightmares beforehand. I didn't wake up repeatedly. I was out, the kind of deep sleep where you don't remember drifting off at all. That's why what happened next felt so jarring, because it wasn't like I woke up slowly and started imagining shapes in the dark. I woke up out of a dead sleep around 4 a.m. It was instant. My eyes opened and I was awake in that sharp, alert way that usually only happens when something pulls you out of sleep. I sat up on the couch without even thinking, like my body moved first and my mind followed. I remember feeling that strange stillness you get at that hour, when everything in a house is quiet, like the air itself is paused. There was no TV sound, no voices, no movement, just darkness and the faint sense of being in someone else's home. The first thing I did was look down the hall, and at the end of it, there was a woman, not a vague shape, not a shadow that could be a coat on a chair. A woman standing there in a way that made my brain register person immediately. She was at the far end of the hallway, where the bedroom doors were, and she was visible enough that my sleepy mind didn't have to guess what I was looking at. She wasn't crouched or peeking. She was just there, upright, like someone who belonged in the space. For a split second, my brain tried to do that normal thing it does, where it reaches for an explanation that fits reality. I thought maybe it was my friend, or her mom, getting up for water, checking on something, going to the bathroom. It would have made sense to see someone in a hallway at night. People get up, houses creak, doors open. But something about this woman didn't feel like a normal household movement. It felt too calm, too silent, and the timing was too perfect, like she was placed there for me to see. She looked at me for a second. That's the part that made my stomach drop, because it wasn't like I was staring down the hallway and seeing someone who didn't notice me. She met my gaze. It wasn't a casual glance like someone would do if they saw you sitting up and the thought, "Oh, you're awake." It felt more like acknowledgement, like she knew I was looking, and she returned it without surprise. Then she turned and walked through one of the bedroom doors. She didn't walk toward me. She didn't rush away. She didn't run like she'd been caught. She turned as if she had somewhere to go, and simply continued her path. And she didn't reach for the doorknob or do anything that looked like opening it. She just walked through it, like the door wasn't a solid barrier at all. I heard the door open and close. That sound was so real to me in the moment that it's one of the clearest pieces of the memory. The little click, the movement, the soft close, except the door itself never moved. From where I was sitting, I could see the door, and it stayed still. No swing, no shift, no change in how it sat in the frame. But I heard it open and shut as if it had physically moved. And then the hallway was empty again. The whole thing happened quickly, but not so quickly that it felt like a blink. It felt like a full sequence. Wake up, sit up, see a woman, make eye contact, watch her turn, watch her walk through a door, hear the door, see the hallway go empty. And the entire time, I was sitting there on the couch with my heart pounding harder and harder, trying to make my brain catch up to what my eyes had just shown me. For a moment, I didn't move. I didn't scream. I didn't jump off the couch and run down the hallway. I just sat there, frozen, because that's what fear does sometimes. It makes you still. It makes you listen. It makes you question whether you're awake. I remember the feeling of trying to decide if I had actually opened my eyes or if I was half dreaming. But I was awake enough to sit up, awake enough to look down the hall, awake enough to hear the door sound. It didn't feel like a dream scene. It felt like a quiet event that happened in a real house in real darkness. Eventually, I lay back down, but I didn't sleep normally after that. I kept looking down the hallway, checking it, waiting to see her again. Every tiny house noise made me tense up. I didn't want to wake the whole house in the middle of the night over something I couldn't prove, but I also didn't want to pretend it hadn't happened. So I did what a lot of people do in those moments. I waited for morning. The next day, when it was light and normal again, I told my friend about it. I expected her to laugh it off or tell me I had been dreaming. I expected that uncomfortable little joke people make when they don't really believe you, but they don't want to be rude either. I expected to feel embarrassed for bringing it up. So I told her carefully, trying not to sound dramatic, just laying out what I saw and what time it was and how real it felt. And her response knocked the air out of me. She didn't laugh. She didn't act surprised that I'd said something weird. She didn't say, "You were dreaming." She just reacted like I had finally noticed something that was already part of the house. She said, in this calm, almost matter-of-fact way, "Oh, so you saw the woman." Then she explained that she and her mom see the woman too, and her dad and her brother always see a little girl. That detail made my skin prickle, because it meant this wasn't just some random one-off story in their family. It wasn't like, "Oh yeah, I once thought I saw something." It was a pattern, a shared thing. Something multiple people in the house had seen over time, consistently enough that they could casually label it. The woman. The little girl. Like they were unofficial roommates everyone had learned to live around. The strangest part to me was the split. Me and her mom see the woman. Dad and brother see the little girl. That kind of division is eerie because it suggests the phenomenon had its own rules, like it chose who it showed itself to, or it presented different faces to different people. It also makes you wonder what the woman and the little girl were doing, whether they were connected, whether it was the same presence appearing in different forms, or whether there were truly two separate figures tied to the house. I asked questions, of course. I wanted details. How often? Where do you see her? Does she speak? Does she do anything? Do you ever feel scared? And the way my friend talked about it made it sound like it was just there. Like it was part of the background of life in that house. Not something that happened every night, but something that happened enough that they were used to it. Something they occasionally mentioned. Sometimes with chills, sometimes with a shrug. Because what else do you do when you can't change it and it isn't actively hurting you? As far as I know, they're still there, the woman and the little girl. My friend told me they still see them sometimes. Not always, not on command. Just every now and then, like the house decides to remind you that you're not fully alone, even when you think you are. And that's what stayed with me more than anything, the normal way she said it. The way she treated it like a known fact, because that's what turned my experience from being a scary personal moment into something bigger. It meant I hadn't just woken up and imagined a figure in the dark. I had seen the same woman her and her mom had seen. I had stepped into a story that was already ongoing, like a book that had been opened long before I walked into the room. Even now, when I picture that night, I can still see the hallway as a long, dark line from the couch, and that woman at the end of it, standing still for a second, as if she was deciding whether to let me see her. I can still feel the sudden jolt of fear when she looked back at me. I can still hear that door sound, that impossible open and close noise that didn't match what my eyes witnessed. It's the kind of experience that would be easy to doubt if you were alone in it. But the moment my friend confirmed it, the doubt turned into something else. Not certainty, exactly, because you can never be fully certain about things like this, but a different kind of unsettled knowing. Like the house had its own inhabitants, and that night at 4 a.m., I happened to wake up at the exact moment one of them was walking down the hall. I used to go night running really late, the kind of late that makes the world feel like it belongs to somebody else. Usually it was somewhere between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m., when most houses are dark, most people are asleep, and even familiar places looked different. I liked it because it was quiet and simple. No crowds, no traffic, no daylight distractions, just the sound of my own breathing and my shoes on the road. It was a way to clear my head. But there was one route I took that, even before anything happened, always had a strange vibe. It ran up a valley near my house. And there was a stretch of the road where everything around you felt like it was designed to make you uneasy without being obviously scary. The road passed through an area where there were cemeteries on both sides. Not just a small graveyard tucked behind a church, but actual cemeteries flanking the road, the kind of thing you notice even in daylight. At night, they felt like dark open spaces, quiet and still, with fences and rows you couldn't fully see. You'd run through there and feel the air change, like the valley got a little colder and the silence got a little heavier. On top of that, there was an abandoned Japanese Shinto temple nearby. I'm not even trying to make it sound dramatic, it's just what was there. The idea of a temple sitting abandoned in the dark, close to the road, close to cemeteries, gave that part of the run a specific kind of atmosphere. Even if you don't believe in anything supernatural, you still feel it when you're moving through places tied to death, worship, and silence, especially at hours when you're normally not supposed to be there. Most nights, I ran that stretch without thinking too much about it. It was just part of the route. I'd pass through, my mind on pace and breathing, and keep going. But one night, during one of those runs, Something happened that still gives me a chill just remembering it. I was running between the cemeteries, right in that corridor, where the road feels narrower, even if it isn't, because the darkness on both sides presses in. That's when I noticed someone by a bus stop. It wasn't far ahead, and because it was late, the sight of a person at all was unusual. There aren't many people standing around at that hour, especially in a valley, especially between cemeteries. As I got closer, I could see she was an older Asian woman. She wasn't moving around like someone impatiently waiting, and she didn't look like she was lost or wandering. She was just standing there, right by the bus stop, in a way that felt almost posed, like she had been placed there. As I approached, she looked directly at me and said, "Hi." But it wasn't a quick, casual hello the way people normally greet a stranger who jogs past. She said it in a very slow, deliberate way, as if she was making sure I heard every part of the word, and she waved at me. Again, not a normal, quick wave. It felt measured, almost careful. The kind of wave you'd give if you wanted to make absolutely certain you were seen. In the moment, I didn't stop. I didn't want to break my run, and I didn't feel threatened exactly, just confused and slightly unsettled by how out of place it seemed. I nodded and smiled at her the way you do when you don't want to be rude. My brain filed it as odd, but not immediately alarming. I kept jogging, past her, and continued up the road. My turnaround point was about 5 minutes past that bus stop. That was part of my routine. I'd run up to that point, turn around, and run back down the same way. So I kept going, reached the turnaround spot, and headed back. And when I came back down the road, the woman was gone. It wasn't like she had moved a little bit away from the bus stop. She wasn't sitting on the bench. She wasn't walking down the road. She wasn't standing in the shadows behind the bus stop sign. She was just gone. The bus stop area was empty. At first, I thought maybe she got on a bus, because that's the normal explanation. But no buses or cars had driven past me in either direction while I was running that stretch. At that hour, you hear vehicles coming from far away. Headlights cut through the darkness. You feel the sound before you see it. There had been nothing. No bus pulling up, no car stopping, nothing that would explain her suddenly disappearing. And if she had decided to walk away, I feel like I would have seen her, because the road didn't have a bunch of side streets or easy hiding spots in that section. 5 minutes isn't a long time. Even if she walked quickly, she shouldn't have been able to vanish completely without me seeing any movement at all. That's the part that crept up on me later. In the moment, I think I just noted it and kept running, because when you're alone at night and something feels strange, sometimes your brain chooses the simplest path, which is to keep moving and not think too hard until you're safe at home. But later, when I replayed it, the weirdness hit me harder. Why was she there so late at night, standing between cemeteries near an abandoned temple? Why did she greet me in that slow, deliberate tone, like she wanted to make sure the greeting landed? And where did she go in 5 minutes with no vehicles passing and no sign of her walking anywhere? Even now, what gives me the biggest chill is the way she said, "Hi." It's hard to explain to someone who wasn't there, because on paper, it's just a greeting. But you can feel when someone speaks in a way that doesn't match the situation. It didn't sound friendly in a normal way. It sounded intentional, like it mattered, like it was part of something. The wave, too, felt almost ceremonial, like the motion was meant to be noticed and remembered. And the fact that it did get noticed and remembered, that it stuck to me for years, makes me wonder if that was the whole point of it. After that, the route didn't feel the same. It's funny how one moment can change a place you've passed 100 times. That stretch of road between the cemeteries started to feel less like a normal part of my run and more like a spot where something can happen, something you can't easily explain. I found myself thinking about it when I approached that area, scanning ahead the way you do when you're nervous, listening for footsteps, watching the bus stop even from a distance. The calm, head-clearing part of the run was gone. It had been replaced by that alert feeling, like your body expects something strange now. Needless to say, I changed my running route shortly after that. Not because I had proof of anything paranormal, not because I could say for sure she wasn't just a real person who somehow left quickly, but because the whole situation felt off in a way I couldn't shake. When something gives you that cold crawl up your spine and your brain keeps returning to it even when you don't want to, you learn to respect that feeling. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was simply a late-night encounter with someone who had a reason to be there that I'll never know. But the way she looked at me, the slow, deliberate hi, the careful wave, and then the sudden disappearance into a road that should have offered nowhere to disappear, was enough to turn a familiar route into a memory I still feel in my bones. And the weirdest part is that I didn't feel terror in the moment. I felt it afterward. That delayed fear, the kind that creeps in when you're safe and your mind starts connecting the dots. It's like your body stays calm so you can get through the situation. And then later, once you're home, it lets you feel the full weight of how strange it actually was. That's what happened to me. I kept running that night, finished my route, went home, and only later did I realize how little sense it made. And even now, years later, I can still picture her at that bus stop between the cemeteries, waving slowly in the dark like she knew I would remember her. I was around 10 years old when this happened, and even now I can still remember the way the air felt that day, like the woods were holding their breath. I was walking with my buddy on his family's property, a place I already knew well enough that it felt almost like a second backyard to me. His land was big, with long stretches of trees and narrow paths worn into the ground from years of footsteps, bikes, and kids wandering around with nothing to do but explore. We had a handful of spots we called our hangouts. Little clearings or places where the trees opened up just enough for us to feel like we had our own secret world. We'd go out there all the time, like it was normal, like it was just another part of growing up. We didn't think of it as scary. It was just where we played, where we talked, where we tried to be older than we really were. That day, we weren't doing anything special. It wasn't a camping trip or some big planned adventure. It was just us heading out the way we always did, walking along the path toward one of those familiar spots. My friend was a step or two ahead of me, like he usually was, moving with that confident ease kids have when they feel like the place belongs to them. He knew those woods better than I did. He knew where the ground dipped, where the roots stuck out, where you could cut across to save time. I was following behind, not far, just close enough that if he stopped suddenly, I would have to react right away. And that's exactly what happened. We both stopped. Not slowly, not like we were deciding whether to keep going. It was instant, like someone had snapped a string inside both of us at the same time. One moment we were walking, and the next we were frozen in place. I remember the silence more than anything, because it wasn't the normal quiet you hear in the woods. It was like everything went still all at once. No rustling, no birds calling, no casual little noises that usually fill the background. It felt like the sound had been turned down. Something was in front of us. At first, my mind didn't have words for it. I didn't think animal or person right away. I just knew there was a shape that shouldn't have been there, sitting where the path ahead of us narrowed between the trees. The woods weren't wide open in that spot. It was a tighter area, more shadows, more branches. The light came through in pieces, and it made everything look half hidden even when it was right in front of you. But this wasn't half hidden, it was there. Solid, real, too close. I remember my eyes trying to make sense of it, like my brain kept flipping through options it understood, trying to match what I was looking at to something normal. But nothing fit. It wasn't a deer. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't some raccoon or a big dog. It was bigger than that, and the way it sat didn't look like an animal resting. It sat like a person sits, like it had a spine and shoulders and arms that could move the way ours did. It was hunched in a way that made it look heavy, like it had weight in the upper body, like it could stand if it wanted to. And that's when it hit me, the most basic thing my child brain could form into a sentence. Me and my buddy saw a monster. There's no other clean way to say it. I know how that sounds. I know the word monster makes people imagine movies, costumes, rubber masks, and special effects. But at 10 years old, staring into the woods at something that shouldn't exist, that word was the only one that made sense. It wasn't just something weird. It wasn't just an animal we couldn't identify. It felt wrong in a deeper way, like it didn't belong in the world we thought we understood. The shape of it was like a hominid, like a human body that had been built out of something else. That's the part that stuck with me all these years, because the material is what made it feel unreal. It didn't look like fur. It didn't look like skin. It looked like it was made of tree bark, layered and rough, with that cracked texture you see on old trunks. But it also had another texture mixed in, something that reminded me of beehive material, like those pale honeycomb shapes, dry and papery. The kind you see when a nest has been abandoned. It wasn't shiny. It wasn't wet. It didn't look like mud, either. It looked like it was built from the woods itself, like the forest had shaped it out of bark and hive and decided to give it a body. It was sitting down, and for a half second, my brain tried to tell me it hadn't noticed us. It was facing away, turned in the opposite direction. And there was this brief moment where I thought maybe we could back up quietly. Maybe we could turn around without making a sound. Maybe it was just something weird that didn't even know we were there. Then it turned. Not slowly like a tired animal. Not casually like a person who heard a twig snap and looked over their shoulder. It turned in a way that felt too direct, like it already knew we were there before we even stopped. The movement was simple, but it was enough to erase that tiny hope that we could disappear and be forgotten. It turned around and looked right at us. And I mean looked right at us, like eye contact, like focus. Whatever it had where its eyes should have been, it locked onto us in a way that made my stomach drop. It wasn't staring through us like an animal that doesn't understand what it sees. It was staring at us like it did understand, like it was aware, like it knew two kids had walked into its space. That moment didn't last long, but it stretched out inside me like time got weird. I remember feeling my entire body go cold and hot at the same time. My hands felt heavy. My legs felt both numb and ready to run. I didn't think about being brave. I didn't think about yelling. I didn't think about throwing a stick or making myself look big like adults tell you to do with bears. Those weren't even options in my mind. All the courage and curiosity we normally had in those woods disappeared instantly. It was replaced by one simple command that felt like it came from deep inside my bones. Run. The strangest part, and maybe the most telling part, was what we didn't do. We didn't talk. Not a single word. No, what is that? No, do you see it? No, let's go. We didn't even look at each other. We didn't do that thing kids do where they check someone else's face to see if they're scared too. We didn't do a double take. We didn't try to convince ourselves it was a trick of the light. We didn't do anything dramatic. It was like our bodies agreed on the decision before our minds could catch up. We turned around and sprinted. It wasn't a jog. It wasn't a careful, fast walk. It was full-on, panicked sprinting like we were being chased. The path behind us, which usually felt familiar and easy, suddenly felt long and tangled. The trees blurred. Branches slapped at us. The ground was uneven, and we didn't care. We ran, like the woods had turned into a trap, and the only way out was the house. I remember my breath burning in my throat almost right away. 10-year-old lungs aren't built for long sprints, especially not through the kind of terrain that makes you lift your feet higher and watch for roots. But fear does something to you. It gives you speed you don't normally have. It makes you stop noticing pain until later. We ran straight back the way we came, cutting through the trees without even thinking about staying on the path. My friend's house wasn't right next to the woods. There was a stretch you had to cross, and then you had to go up this steep driveway. I remember that driveway so clearly because normally we'd walk up it and complain about it, especially on hot days. It was the kind of driveway that felt like a hill you had to climb, long and angled. And it always made your legs tired by the time you reached the top. That day, we didn't slow down for it. We hit that driveway and sprinted up it like something was right behind us. My legs felt like they were going to give out, but they didn't. I could hear my own footsteps pounding the gravel. I could hear my friend in front of me breathing hard, and it made me push harder, like if I fell behind even by a step, something would grab me. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I was terrified that if I looked back, I'd see it moving, standing, following, reaching. The idea of seeing it again was worse than not knowing. When we got to the house, we didn't stop outside to catch our breath. We didn't pause on the porch. We didn't hesitate at the door like we were worried about getting in trouble for running inside, dirty and loud. We ran straight into the house like it was a safe zone, like crossing the threshold would make whatever we saw impossible to reach us. We burst inside, probably slamming the door behind us, hearts pounding so hard it felt like it was shaking our ribs. And then we just existed in that terror. I can picture us standing there, breathless, wide-eyed, trying to pull in air, trying to make our bodies calm down. I can't even remember if his parents were home or if anyone asked what happened right away. If they were, I don't remember what we said because the fear was bigger than words. It wasn't the kind of fear that turns into a funny story the next day. It was the kind that makes you feel small and exposed and unsafe in a place you used to love. We didn't go back out there that day. That's obvious. But what stayed with me was how clear the moment was when the woods changed. Before that, the woods were just woods, a playground, a place with secrets and fun and imagination. After that, the woods felt like a place where something could be waiting. Something that didn't care about our rules. Something that didn't belong on any map. Even now, when I try to describe it, I can't pretend I have all the details. I can't tell you its exact height, or what its hands looked like, or whether it had a mouth. I was 10. I saw it for seconds. My brain was in panic mode, but I can tell you exactly how it felt to see it, and that feeling has never really left. It felt like we had stumbled onto something we weren't meant to see. It felt like the forest had a resident that wasn't an animal, wasn't a person, and wasn't part of the normal world. And the biggest proof for me, the thing that makes it hard to write it off as imagination, was my buddy, because I wasn't alone. I didn't see it and then decide later that I had seen something. He saw it too, at the exact same time, and he reacted the exact same way. 2 kids, 1 moment, 1 silent decision. If it had been a shadow or a stump or some weird-shaped tree, one of us would have laughed or at least asked, "What are you doing?" But there was none of that. Just shared terror, shared understanding, and an immediate sprint back to the house like our lives depended on it. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we had stayed, if we had spoken, if we had made noise, if we had tried to get a better look. But I also know that 10-year-old me did the smartest thing he could do in that moment. Because whatever it was, it looked at us. It didn't ignore us. It noticed. And the way it noticed us was enough to send us running without a single word between us, all the way through the woods, up that steep driveway, and into the safety of 4 walls. I still don't have a better name for it than the one I used back then. A monster. It was Easter morning, and I was still in elementary school, the age where Easter feels like a real event, not just a date on a calendar. The whole house had that bright, excited energy that comes with holidays when you're a kid. You wake up early, you run around, you're hunting for eggs like it's the most important mission of your life. Everything feels a little magical, even if you don't fully believe in the magic anymore. The living room is usually an stage for that kind of morning too, because that's where baskets show up, where people gather, where the excitement happens. It's familiar, safe, and completely normal. We did our Easter egg hunt like always. I don't remember every detail of the hunt itself, but I remember the feeling of it, the rush of looking under things, checking corners, spotting bright colors, the little thrill every time you find one. When you're that age, you're not thinking about how parents make it happen. You're just taking it in, and even if part of you suspects the truth, you still want to play along. You still want to believe a little, or at least you want the day to feel special. After the hunt was over, I was just moving around the house, probably still buzzing from all the sugar and excitement. At some point in the living room, I found one of my toy hairbrushes. It was a small brush I used on my dolls, the kind that's clearly a toy, not something a grown-up would use. I recognized it right away because it was mine, part of my doll stuff, something I'd handled a million times. But the moment I saw it that morning, my stomach dropped in this weird, confused way because it didn't look like my brush anymore. It was completely flattened. Not slightly bent like it had been stepped on. Not cracked like it had been dropped. Flattened in a way that looked intentional, like something heavy had pressed it down with force. The plastic was crushed, the shape was wrong, and it looked ruined. And then there was the hair. Thick, yellow hair stuck in the bristles. Not a few strands. Not something you could shrug off as lint or a doll's synthetic hair shedding. It was jammed in there as if something had been brushing itself with it, pulling hair through the bristles and leaving it trapped. The hair wasn't fine and soft like human hair tends to be. It looked and felt wrong, like it belonged to an animal. Coarse, thick, kind of stubborn looking, like the kind of hair you'd see in a brush after grooming a pet. Except we didn't have any pets. No cat, no dog, no rabbit, nothing. And even if it had somehow been human hair, it didn't match anyone in my family. Everyone had brown hair. There wasn't anyone with thick, yellow hair that could explain it. I remember staring at it for a long moment, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It was one of those moments where your brain knows something is off, but it's still trying to force it into a normal explanation. Maybe someone dropped it. Maybe it got caught under furniture. Maybe it got mixed up with something else. But none of those explanations worked. The brush looked like it had been used, abused, and changed. and the hair stuck in it made it feel like evidence of something, like proof that something had happened when no one was watching. I took it to my parents immediately because I didn't know what else to do. When you're a kid and you find something that doesn't make sense, you take it to an adult and expect the adult world to restore order. You expect them to say, "Oh, that's because of this." And then everything goes back to normal. I walked up to them with the brush in my hands, showing them the flattened plastic and the thick yellow hair tangled in the bristles. I probably sounded half panicked and half excited because it felt scary and fascinating at the same time. Their reaction was not what I expected. They were shocked too. I could tell right away by their faces that this wasn't one of those moments where the adult smiles politely and humors you. This wasn't them playing along with a holiday trick. They looked genuinely confused. But instead of immediately explaining it, they didn't even believe it was my brush. That part still sticks with me because I remember thinking, how can you not believe this is mine? I knew my own toys. I knew what that brush was, but they were looking at it like it was some random object they'd never seen before. Like maybe I'd picked up something from somewhere else and was mistaken. And the strangest part was that it was found in our living room on Easter morning, not outside, not in a garage, not somewhere a wild animal could have wandered through. The living room is the heart of the house. It's where people spend time. It's not a place where you expect to find something that looks like it came from a barn or a field. Yet there it was, in the open, on a morning when everything was supposed to be sweet and simple and safe. That contrast made it feel even more impossible. My parents denied having anything to do with it. At the time, I might have thought maybe they were joking. Maybe they were trying to keep the Easter magic alive. Or maybe they were hiding something because parents do that sometimes around holidays. But they didn't deny it in a playful way. They denied it in a serious way, like they truly had no idea how it happened. And even now, as an adult, they still deny it. They don't shrug and say, "Okay, yeah, we did something weird." They don't laugh and admit it was a prank. They stick to the same story. They had nothing to do with it, so you're left with this weird little mystery that sits in your brain forever. Because it's not like it was a ghost in the hallway or a shadow in a window, something you could blame on your imagination. It was a physical object you could hold. A brush that was crushed, hair that was trapped in the bristles. A tangible thing that made no sense in the context of your house, your family, and your mourning. And when something like that happens to you as a kid, it gets filed in a special place in your memory. Not as a clear explanation, but as a question mark you carry around. Even if you grow up and become logical and skeptical, there's still that part of you that remembers how real it looked, how strange it felt, and how even the adults didn't have an answer. That's why, even now, you can laugh about it and still mean it a little. You can say you're 30 years old and low-key think the Easter Bunny is real, and it's funny, but it's also not entirely a joke, because your brain still has that image of thick yellow hair stuck in your doll brush, like some mysterious animal used it and left behind proof. It's the kind of story that may keep the door cracked open to the possibility of weird things. Not necessarily because you truly believe in a giant bunny sneaking into houses, but because you know for a fact that something happened and you never got a satisfying explanation. And honestly, the way you end the story makes perfect sense too. Even if you don't fully believe, why would you gamble with it? If you ever have kids, you're still going to buy them Easter eggs. You're still going to make the morning special. Because part of being a parent is creating that magic, whether it's real or not, and part of being the kid who found that brush is thinking, what if? What if something really does show up when no one's looking? What if there's a little slice of the world that still runs on holiday rules we don't understand? So you'll do both. You'll cover your bases. You'll keep the tradition alive. You'll give your kids the excitement you had. And somewhere in the back of your mind, you'll remember that one Easter morning in the living room when you found a flattened toy hairbrush jammed with thick yellow hair that didn't belong to anyone in your house. And even your parents looked at it like they couldn't explain it. And you'll smile because it's a creepy little mystery wrapped inside a holiday memory. And you'll also feel that tiny flicker of belief you can never fully stamp out because you saw something that didn't fit the rules. Two days after my wife passed away in 2021, the world still didn't feel real. Everything was both too loud and too quiet at the same time. The house looked the same, but it didn't feel the same, like someone had taken the meaning out of the rooms and left only the shapes behind. I remember moving through those days like I was underwater, doing simple things because I was supposed to, because the kids needed structure, because you can't just stop time even when you want to. There were moments where I would forget for half a second, like my brain would reach for the usual rhythm of life, and then it would hit me again, sharp and heavy, and the air would feel thick. The kids were with me, and that made everything more complicated and more focused at the same time. I couldn't disappear into my own grief the way people sometimes do, because they were right there, watching me, needing me, trying to understand what had happened in their own ways. We were all together in the same house, in the same shock, trying to sit in the same living room without the person who was supposed to be sitting there too. That evening, we were in the living room, the three of us, just trying to exist. We put on South Park, which is almost funny to even say, because my wife hated that show. She hated it in that strong, clear way some people have, where they don't just dislike something, they truly cannot stand it. If it came on, she would roll her eyes, complain, change the channel, or leave the room. It was one of those small, normal things that you don't fully appreciate until the person is gone, and suddenly every little preference becomes a missing piece. That's part of what grief does. It turns ordinary details into sharp reminders. So there we were, watching the show she couldn't stand. And the fact that we could watch it now, without her protesting, wasn't fun or freeing. It felt strange. It felt wrong. It felt like we were testing the edges of the new reality and finding out that, yes, she really wasn't going to walk in and say something about it. The episode that happened to be on was the one where the boys are trying to build some kind of stairwell or ladder to heaven to get something back from Kenny's dead body. Even that detail felt like the universe was being cruel in a very specific way. The timing of it, 2 days after we had just lost someone we loved, and we're sitting there watching a cartoon about death and trying to reach heaven. I didn't pick it because of that. It just came on. But I remember noticing it and feeling that weird kind of laugh that isn't really a laugh, more like a bitter breath, because sometimes life lines things up in a way that feels too on the nose. I remember my kids sitting there, watching, and I wondered what they were feeling. Were they distracted? Were they numb? Were they trying not to think? Were they thinking about their mom anyway, no matter what was on TV? I didn't know. I just knew we were together, and together felt like the only thing we could do. Then the episode brought up Alan Jackson, and that hit me in a completely different way. Alan Jackson was my wife's favorite singer from her youth. That wasn't a casual favorite either. It was the kind of favorite that carried memories with it. A voice that could bring her back to a certain time in her life. Songs she could sing along to without thinking. Stuff she loved in that sweet, nostalgic way. Hearing his name in that moment made my chest tighten. It made me picture her in a way that felt close and far at the same time. It wasn't like the show had done anything special. It just included him, like a random cultural reference, like it meant nothing. But for us, it meant something. For me, it meant her. For the kids, it meant their mom. I remember thinking about how she would have reacted if she were sitting there with us, how she would probably complain about the show and then pause for a second because Alan Jackson was mentioned. And maybe she'd say something. Maybe she'd smile. Maybe she'd tell some little story. The brain does that. It keeps playing those "what would she have done" scenes. Like it's trying to keep the person alive by imagining the missing reactions. So we're sitting there, and the air in the room feels heavy, but also weirdly normal, because the TV is on, and the kids are there, and I'm trying to stay present. And then something happened that pulled all of us out of that moment in an instant. Life 360 went off, on my phone and on both of my kids' phones. Those alert sounds are sharp and immediate, and when they go off at the same time across multiple devices, it makes your body react like something important is happening. The message said, "Mom had left home." That was the alert. Mom had left home. It was simple, automatic wording, the kind of thing you don't think about when it's normal, when someone is alive and actually moving around and their phone is with them. But my wife was gone, and her phone was not moving. Her phone was on the counter in the kitchen. For a second, my brain refused to understand it. It didn't match the reality I was standing in. I remember pausing the TV, or at least losing track of it entirely, because suddenly all my attention went to that alert. The kids noticed too, because their phones had gone off. And when kids see a notification like that about their mom, especially right after losing her, their faces change in a way that's hard to describe. There's confusion, there's hope, there's fear, there's that wild need for something impossible to be true. I didn't want to feed that hope, but I couldn't ignore what was happening either. I looked at the phones again, thinking maybe I misread it. I looked at my screen, then at theirs. Same thing. Mom had left home. My first thought was that it was just a glitch. Technology does weird things sometimes. Apps lose signal. GPS jumps. Phones misread location for a moment. I wanted it to be that, because that explanation was safe and simple and didn't open any doors I wasn't ready to open. I said something along the lines of, "It's probably just a weird glitch," and I started moving toward the kitchen to check the phone, like seeing it with my own eyes would settle it. And there it was, her phone, sitting on the counter, exactly where it was supposed to be. Not in a pocket, not in a car, not gone, just sitting there, completely still. The sight of it made my stomach twist, because it confirmed the straw part in a way that was hard to laugh off. If the phone was on the counter, then what was Life 360 tracking? What exactly had left home? Why did the app think she was moving? I picked up the phone, almost without thinking. I looked at the screen. I checked the app. I refreshed it, because that's what you do when something doesn't make sense. You refresh and you hope it corrects itself. For a moment, I expected it to snap back to the home location and prove it was nothing. But it didn't. It showed her location somewhere else. Not just slightly off, not a few houses away, not drifting around the neighborhood like bad GPS sometimes does. It showed a specific place, a specific home. And when I saw where it was, the hairs on my arms lifted. It wasn't random. It wasn't a highway. It wasn't an empty lot. It wasn't some weird dot in the middle of nowhere. The location it showed was the home of one of her Girl Scouts, a little disabled girl who my wife adored. Not just liked, but truly cared for in a special way. The kind of kid who stays in your heart because you can see their sweetness, their struggle, their need to be protected and loved. My wife had always had a soft spot for her. She didn't treat her like a charity case or talk about her like she was a problem. She just cared deeply the way my wife cared about people. That girl mattered to her in a way that was obvious if you knew her at all. Seeing that address on the screen made my throat tighten, because if it was a glitch, it was a cruelly specific one. It picked the one place that made emotional sense. It picked the one place that felt like a meaningful choice, rather than a random GPS error. And that's the moment my mind shifted from, "This is a weird bug," to "What if this is something else?" I didn't say that out loud right away, because I didn't want to scare the kids or send them spiraling. But inside, the thought landed heavy. What if she wanted to visit her one last time? That idea came into my head so clearly, almost like it was placed there. Maybe that's because grief makes you look for signs, or maybe it's because the connection was too perfect to ignore. If my wife could go anywhere in those first days after death, if there was any way for her presence to reach out, why wouldn't she go to the child she cared about? Why wouldn't she check on the girl who looked up to her? Why wouldn't she want to comfort her in some way, even if nobody could see it? The kids were watching me, watching my face, watching the phone. I remember trying to keep myself steady, trying not to let my expression show too much. But I also remember not being able to hide the shock completely, because it wasn't just that it was weird, it was that it was her name, her movement, her leaving home notification. It was like the app was acting as if she was still part of the world, still walking around, still capable of going places. And that made something inside me ache in a way that's hard to explain. It was like a tiny crack opened between the impossible and the real, and for a moment you could see through it. We sat there and watched the location. I kept refreshing it because I couldn't not. The kids kept looking too. We didn't know what to do with it. You can't call the police because an app says a dead person left home. You can't call the girl's parents and say, "Hey, our tracking app says my wife is at your house," because how do you even form those words without sounding unhinged? And even if you did, what would you expect them to say? They'd check the front yard and find nothing, because of course they would. So all we could do was watch and breathe and sit with it. It stayed there for about 10 minutes. That time felt longer than 10 minutes, because again, when you're grieving, time stretches. Every second has more weight. We watched her location sit at that house, steady, like she was actually there, like she had actually gone, like she had arrived and paused. And in those minutes, my mind kept moving between two worlds. In one world, I was a rational person watching a glitch happen, telling myself GPS can be wrong, apps can hiccup, phones can bounce signals off towers and place someone in a wrong spot. In the other world, I was a husband who had just lost his wife, sitting with his children, and the universe had decided to show us her name, moving through a map to a place that mattered to her heart. Then, just as strangely as it started, it ended. The app showed that she arrived back at home. The same kind of notification, the same phrasing, like she had taken a quick trip and returned. And after that, nothing like it ever happened again. No more phantom trips, no more alerts, no more weird jumps to meaningful places. It returned to behaving like an ordinary tracking app, like it remembered the rules again. That never again part is what makes it hard to shrug off completely, because if it was a glitch, you might expect more glitches. You might expect random jumps or repeated errors. or at least some kind of pattern that points toward a technical explanation. But this was one event, one very specific trip, at a very specific time, to a very specific place, and then silence. It felt like a message that came through once, and then stopped. And maybe that's just my grief shaping the story, my mind making a neat arc out of something messy. I'm aware of that. I'm aware that grief can make coincidences feel like fate. But I'm also aware of how it felt in the moment, the way the room changed when those phones went off, the way the kids looked up like the world had just shifted, the way my own heart reacted before my logic could catch up. I think about the details that were layered on top of that moment too, like the fact that we were watching a show she hated. It sounds silly, but it mattered because it was such a her thing to hate that show. It mattered because it made her absence feel sharper. And then the episode being about building a ladder to heaven, about death and the afterlife, and then the mention of Alan Jackson, her favorite singer from her youth, as if the TV had somehow wandered into her territory for a moment. I'm not saying the universe was directing a script. I'm not saying it was supernatural because of the episode. But when you're sitting in grief, those details can feel like they're glowing. They can feel like the world is nudging you. And then the Life 360 alert comes, and suddenly it's not just a feeling. It's something on a screen, something you can point to, something both kids saw too. The part that stays with me the most is imagining her at that Girl Scouts home. I picture her the way she was with that child, gentle, patient, genuinely happy to be there. I picture her kneeling down to talk to her, smiling, making her feel safe. And even though I know I can't prove anything, the thought brings me a weird kind of comfort. Because if my wife could choose one last place to go, it makes sense that she would choose a place where she was needed, where she was loved, where she felt that sweet responsibility that comes with caring for kids who look up to you. It makes sense that, even in death, her heart would still pull her towards someone she adored. It also makes sense that she would come back home afterward, because home was us. Home was where her kids were. Home was where her life was. And maybe, if there's any truth to any of this at all, maybe she wanted us to see it. Maybe she wanted her kids to get that tiny, strange moment where it felt like mom was still moving in the world, still visiting people, still being mom in the way she knew how. Maybe she wanted us to know she wasn't just gone into nothing. Or maybe it was simply a glitch. And the timing carved meaning into it, because we were raw and desperate for anything that wasn't silence. I don't think anyone can tell you for sure what it was. If you take it to a tech person, they'll probably explain how GPS can drift and how apps can misread location. And those explanations might be true in a general sense. If you take it to someone who believes in signs, they'll tell you it was absolutely her, visiting someone she loved and letting her family see that she was still around. I live somewhere in the middle of those two explanations, because I can respect the logic and still honor what it felt like to experience that in the exact moment we did. Because I was there, the kids were there. The phone was on the kitchen counter. The alert still said Mom had left home. The map still placed her at that little girl's house for about 10 minutes. Then it showed her arriving back home. And then it never did anything like that again. What I do know is that it gave me a story that doesn't feel dark in the way most grief stories do. It feels strange, yes, but there's something tender inside it too. It's one of the rare memories from those early days after she passed that doesn't only hurt. It also carries a hint of her personality, her care, her loyalty to the people she loved. Even if it was only a glitch, it still pointed at something true about her, which is that she adored that child and would have wanted to see her. And if it wasn't a glitch, if it was some kind of last visit, then it's the kind of last visit that feels exactly like her, not dramatic, not centered on herself, but quietly going to a place where her presence mattered, staying for a little while, and then coming back home.
Forgive me for stepping in for just a moment. If you've only recently found your way here, then welcome. I'm glad you came. If these stories are keeping you company tonight, consider subscribing to Crowvane Manor. New stories arrive here often, the kind that stay with you long after the night is over. And if you tap the bell, you won't have to go looking. The next one will find you on its own. Thank you for being here. Now, let's return to where we left off.
When I was 5 years old, my family moved to a new house, and I hated it before I even understood what it meant to hate a place. My parents used to tell the story like it was a funny little family detail, like I was being dramatic or fussy the way little kids sometimes are. They would say I hated it from the moment I saw it. And the older I got, the more I realized they weren't exaggerating. It really was instant. The second my eyes landed on that house, something in me locked up. It wasn't a mild dislike or that normal kid fear of change. It was a fierce, panicky certainty that the place was wrong, bad, like it had teeth. I didn't have words for it at 5. I couldn't explain why my stomach dropped or why my skin felt tight the way it does when you sensed danger. I just knew I didn't want to go inside. I remember begging them not to move there. Begging like it mattered, like if I said it enough times they'd understand that I wasn't just whining. I begged them not to make me sleep alone in what was supposed to be my new bedroom. I begged for us to move again as soon as possible to any other house, because this one was bad. That was the word I used, and it felt important, like it covered everything I couldn't explain. Bad meant it wasn't safe. Bad meant something could happen. Bad meant I could feel something watching even when nothing was there. For a while after we moved in, I was just a little kid trying to adjust, and my parents were adults juggling boxes and routines and all the normal stress that comes with a move. I don't remember every detail of those first weeks, but I do remember the way that house felt different depending on where you were standing. Some rooms felt heavy, like the air was thicker. The upstairs felt like it belonged to someone else. It wasn't just that it was unfamiliar, it felt occupied, even when it was empty. I know how that sounds, but that's the only way I can explain it. I wasn't imagining furniture or hearing voices that said words. It was more like a pressure, like walking into a room and immediately wanting to leave, like your body is warning you before your mind can make excuses. I was a 5-year-old, which meant I was still getting in trouble in the simple, ordinary ways little kids do. Sometimes if I was naughty, I'd be put in timeout. I actually didn't mind timeout most of the time. That's the funny part. Timeout in the living room or a corner somewhere felt peaceful to me because it meant everyone stopped yelling. It meant the moment was over and the volume came down. I could sit quietly and wait for things to be normal again. There was a kind of relief in that, even at 5. But sometimes my parents decided time out had to be alone in my room. The second they said that, something in me would flip. I would absolutely lose it. I'd beg them not to make me go up there, not to close the door, not to leave me alone. And the reason I gave them sounded ridiculous, even to them, because I'd cry and plead and say it was because of the wolves. That phrase still makes me feel cold when I think about it, because I can remember how real those wolves felt to me. I wasn't playing pretend. I wasn't making up a story to get out of punishment. I was terrified. When I was alone in my room upstairs, I would hear them. I'd hear howling and low growling, and the sound of something sniffing, and the scratch of claws against floors or walls. It didn't sound like it was in the room with me, which almost made it worse, because it sounded like it was everywhere else. Like it was coming from all the rooms upstairs at once, from the hallway, from behind doors, from the top of the stairs. It sounded like a pack moving around, circling, waiting. I know adults will say, old houses creak, pipes make noise, wind rattles things. But what I heard didn't feel like random house noise. It had rhythm and intention. The scratching didn't sound like wood settling. It sounded like something trying to get in, or something pacing. The sniffing was the creepiest part, because it's such a specific sound. You can almost feel it. Like a nose close to the other side of a door, pulling in air, searching for you. Whenever I was forced to stay upstairs alone, the stairs became my lifeline. I would spend the entire time out staring at the top of them, frozen in this horrible mix of stillness and readiness, like prey. I'd be in abject horror, but I'd also be prepared to run. Sometimes I would try to sneak down the stairs, not all the way, just far enough to give myself a chance. I'd creep down to about halfway and pause there, because from that spot, it felt like if something came out, I could sprint down the rest and reach my parents in the living room before the wolves got me. That was my plan as a 5-year-old. Get close enough to safety without getting caught breaking timeout rules, and then be ready to bolt if the upstairs came alive. I remember the way the top of the staircase looked from where I would sit, the dark shape of the hallway beyond it. It felt like a mouth, like the house was an animal, and the upstairs was where it hid its teeth. I would stare so hard my eyes would hurt, waiting for something to move, waiting for a shadow to change, waiting for the moment when I'd have to run. Most of the time, nothing visible happened, which is what made it torture. You can handle a scare that ends, but it's harder to handle dread that just sits on you. Downstairs had its own feeling too, and the kitchen is the clearest place in my mind. The kitchen had one window over the sink, looking out over the back garden. The garden itself was basically an empty square of grass, nothing fancy, but it had two features that felt huge in my childhood memory. On one side, there was an old shed that looked creepy even in daylight, and at the back end, there was what I always called the forest. As an adult, my mom later told me that forest was really just a thin line of trees separating the back gardens of our street and the next street over. But in my memory, it isn't thin at all. In my memory, it's thick and dark and impenetrable. A wall of trees that went on forever. The kind of forest where you could get lost and never come back. When you're 5, you don't measure things correctly. You measure them by feeling. And that line of trees felt like a boundary between our yard and something unknown. It made the back garden feel less like a normal family space and more like a place where something could stand just beyond the light and watch. The shed didn't help either. It sat there like it didn't belong in a kid's yard, like it had secrets. The wood looked old, the door looked wrong, and even though it was just a shed, it had the same kind of bad feeling as the upstairs did. Like the house had layers of darkness, and the garden was part of it. One winter evening, the thing that is still burned into me happened. It was a normal evening in the sense that my parents and I were all home, and we were watching TV in the living room. The house wasn't empty. The lights were on. The TV was on. It wasn't midnight. There was nothing that should have made me feel like I was in danger. If anything, it should have felt safe. Because my parents were right there, and the evening was calm. At some point, I got up and went into the kitchen to get a drink. I don't remember what I wanted. Maybe water, maybe juice. I remember grabbing a cup. I remember turning toward the sink, because the sink was where you filled it. And then I looked up at the window above the sink, and there he was. In the kitchen window, clear as day, inches away from the glass, was an old man with gray skin, bald. His expression was melancholy and motionless, like sadness had settled into his face and refused to move. He wasn't making a scary face. He wasn't snarling. He wasn't doing anything dramatic. He was just staring at me, completely still, like he had been standing there for a long time and would stand there forever. He wore a tan-colored long coat with a big collar, the kind of collar you might see on a smart shirt or an overcoat. The collar was unfolded and tipped up, the way people do when it's windy or raining, but it wasn't windy or raining. The coat looked too neat and too deliberate for someone who would have been standing in our back garden at night. And yet there he was, right outside the window, close enough that it felt impossible. The kitchen light was on, so the window acted like a mirror and a spotlight at the same time. The inside of the kitchen was lit up, and the outside beyond the glass was dark. That made his face stand out even more. It made him look like he was floating in the night, like he wasn't part of the garden at all, but pressed against the glass because he could be. I froze so hard it felt like my body locked. My mind went blank, except for one thought. There is a man in the window. That's it. That's all I could hold. The fear was instant, the same kind of instant fear I'd felt when I first saw the house. I tried to scream, but it didn't come out right. It came out like a whisper, a tiny, broken sound. I was trying to scream at full volume, but my throat wouldn't do it. It was like my voice got trapped inside me, like fear had a hand over my mouth. That whisper screaming went on for what felt like forever. In reality, it was probably less than a minute, but when you're 5 and your body is flooded with terror, time stretches. Every second feels like 10. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, motionless, staring at him, whisper screaming over and over. The old man didn't move. He didn't blink in any way I could notice. He didn't back away. He didn't turn his head. He just looked at me with that sad, empty, fixed expression. He wasn't lit by moonlight or streetlight. He was lit by the kitchen light, like the house itself was shining on him. I remember how close he looked. Not across the yard, not near the shed, right at the window, like he was leaning in. Like if I reached out, my hand would hit glass and his face would be on the other side of it. Eventually, I managed to get my voice to work properly. I still didn't take my eyes off him. I couldn't. It felt like if I looked away, he would do something. It felt like the only thing keeping him still was the fact that I was watching him. And finally, with my voice coming back, I shouted for my mom. Even as I yelled her name, I didn't move. I just stood there staring at him and yelling for help, my body stiff like a statue. My mom came into the kitchen, and as she did, the old man faded away. He didn't step back. He didn't turn and walk into the darkness. He didn't vanish in a snap. He just faded, slowly becoming invisible while staying completely motionless. It was like someone was turning down the opacity on a picture. His coat and face didn't change position. They just became less and less there until they weren't there at all. One moment he was inches from the window staring at me, and then he was a ghostly outline, and then nothing but the dark garden and my own reflection in the glass. My mom could see I was distressed right away because I must have looked like I'd seen death. She asked what was wrong, and all I could do was repeat the same sentence again and again, panicked and desperate, like saying it would make it real enough for her to believe me. There's a man in the window. There's a man in the window. He's staring at me. I kept saying it over and over, like my brain was stuck on that loop. My dad came into the kitchen too. He was in full parent mode, trying to find the simplest, safest explanation. He picked me up and held me so I could see my reflection in the window, and he tried to tell me I probably just saw that I probably saw my own face and got scared. I remember him being calm, like he genuinely thought he could fix it with logic. And I remember feeling furious and desperate at the same time, because I knew what I saw. The reflection explanation didn't make sense to me even then, because I understood something important. I was too short. The window was above the sink. I was shorter than the sink. I wouldn't have been able to see my own reflection at that angle while standing on the gun floor. He had to pick me up for me to even see myself in the glass. That detail is still so clear in my head because it felt like proof. It felt like the house was trying to be dismissed, like the adults were trying to put a normal label on something that wasn't normal. I kept insisting he was outside. He was right there at the window. He looked sad. He was staring at me. I remember repeating those details because the sadness in his face was one of the most disturbing parts. If he had looked angry or threatening, it would have been easier to categorize. Sadness is confusing. Sadness makes you wonder why he's there and what he wants. It makes you feel like you're seeing something you shouldn't. My dad went out to check, which I appreciated even though I was still terrified. He looked around the back garden, probably checked near the shed, probably scanned the fence line and the trees. He found no one. He came back inside, and my parents spent the rest of the evening trying to calm me down. I don't remember if I slept that night. I don't remember if they let me stay in their room or if they tried to convince me to go upstairs. What I remember is the feeling that something had happened that didn't have a normal explanation, and that the house had proven in one clear moment that it really was bad. Years later, I told the story again, the way people do when they're older, and swapping childhood experiences with friends. My mom was there when I recounted it, and she was shocked by how much detail I still had. The description of the man, the coat, the collar, the gray skin, the expression, the exact way he faded. She couldn't believe it was still that clear in my head. She also didn't know about some of the little details that lived inside me, like the whisper screaming that felt like it lasted a lifetime, because I never described it that way when I was 5. At 5, you don't know how to explain the way your voice disappears. You just know you're trying to scream, and you can't. When we talked about it as adults, my mom suddenly remembered all the other things I hated about that house. She asked if I remembered the wolves. I said yes. And even saying the word made me feel that old fear again, like the upstairs hallway was right behind me. Then she told me something I didn't know. She said they got a good deal on that house. They bought it from a friend. The friend was selling because it had been her parents' house, but her mom died unexpectedly after a quick illness, and later her dad hanged himself in the shed. The daughter just wanted rid of the house as soon as possible, and my parents had been looking for a place at exactly the right time. It was convenient. It was affordable. It made sense on paper. But when my mom told me that, something inside me went cold, because suddenly the map of my memories lined up in a way that made my skin crawl. One of them died upstairs. The other died in the shed. The upstairs was where I felt haunted, where I heard the wolves in every room and waited at the top of the stairs in terror. The shed was in the back garden, the place that already felt wrong to me, the place connected to that line of trees that my mind had turned into a forest. And the old man I saw was outside the kitchen window, in that same garden close to the shed, staring at me with sadness in his face, like grief had become his entire expression. I don't claim to know what I saw. I can't prove that the man was connected to what happened in that house, and I can't prove that my childhood fear Wasn't my imagination trying to process a place that simply felt unfamiliar, but the timing, the details, and the way my body reacted from the moment I saw the house still makes it hard for me to shrug it off completely. It's one thing for a kid to be nervous about moving. It's another thing for a kid to describe wolves upstairs, and then years later learn that there was death tied to those spaces. I also remember we didn't live there long, less than a year. That's another detail that stands out because it suggests I wasn't the only one affected by it. I was a child, so my parents would have been making the real decision, balancing money and logistics and everything else. But I know that event in the kitchen must change something for them. Maybe it wasn't just about me being scared. Maybe it was the look on my face, the conviction in my voice, the way I couldn't be soothed by the simple reflection explanation. Maybe it planted doubt in them. Maybe it made them look at the house differently. Because when we did move again, my parents started asking me a question that still feels strange to think about now. When we went to view other houses, they asked me what I thought. They asked, in a half-joking way, but also not fully joking, was it a bad house? They would take me into rooms and watch my reaction, like I had some kind of internal alarm they could trust. And apparently, they picked the house they still live in today because it was the only one that 5-year-old me said felt good. I think about that sometimes, the idea of a child walking into a place and sensing something the adults don't notice until later. Maybe it was just my imagination. Maybe it was the way some houses feel cold or echoey or strange. Maybe the house we moved into later had brighter windows and a warmer layout, and it made me feel safe. Those are all possible explanations. But I also know what I felt the first time I saw that bad house. And I know what I heard upstairs when I was alone. And I know what I saw in that kitchen window on a winter evening when my parents were only a room away. What stays with me most is that moment of being frozen in the kitchen, the way fear stole my voice and turned my scream into a whisper, the way the old man's sadness felt almost heavier than anger would have, and the way he faded away as my mom entered the room, as if he couldn't exist under her gaze. It's the kind of memory that doesn't fade like a normal childhood memory. It stays sharp, it stays detailed, it stays alive. And the wolves, whether they were real sounds or the house settling or a child's mind filling in the blanks, became part of the shape of that year, a year where I learned what it felt like to be afraid of a place for reasons I couldn't explain. I learned what it felt like to sit at the top of the stairs and stare into the hallway, convinced something was coming, ready to run for my life. I learned what it felt like to call a house bad and mean it with everything in my body. Maybe the house was just a house and my fear was just fear. Maybe grief and adult history seeped into my memory later and made it feel more haunted than it was. But I can't ignore the way my parents changed after it. Asking me about houses like my feelings mattered more than the paint color or the square footage. They didn't treat it like a silly story anymore. They treated it like something worth listening to, and whether they ever admitted it out loud or not, I think part of them believed me. Because they left, they didn't stay. And they chose the home they still live in today because, for whatever reason, the child who hated the bad house the moment he saw it finally walked into another place and said, with relief, that it felt good. When I was in second grade, I woke up one night in a way that felt different from a normal kid waking up from a dream. It wasn't like I slowly drifted awake because I had to use the bathroom or because a noise startled me. It was more like I snapped awake, suddenly aware of the room, suddenly alert, like something had pulled my attention out of sleep. The bedroom was dark, the way bedrooms are at night, full of familiar shapes that look strange when the lights are off. The dresser turns into a shadow. The corners seem deeper. The closet becomes this dark square that your eyes keep drifting toward without you meaning to. I remember lying there, still half under my blankets, trying to get my bearings. Then I saw it. A glowing ball about the size of a volleyball floating out of my bedroom closet. The closet door wasn't banging or shaking or anything dramatic. There was no loud sound that came with it. It was just this pale green light, appearing as if it had always been there, and I had only just opened my eyes enough to notice it. The color is one of the clearest details in my memory. It wasn't bright neon green. It was a softer, pale green, like a glow that had been turned down, almost gentle in brightness, but still strong enough to clearly light itself in the dark. It didn't flash. It didn't flicker wildly. It just existed. I watched it drift out of the closet and then hover in the middle of the room. That hovering is what made it feel so unreal. If it had been a flashlight beam or headlights from outside, it would have moved across surfaces. If it had been a reflection, it would have depended on angles. If it had been something like a nightlight, it would have stayed in one place. But this wasn't on a wall or on the ceiling. It was a ball of light suspended in open air. It wasn't touching anything. It wasn't resting on a shelf or floating near the floor like fog. It was just there, hanging in space like it didn't care about gravity or logic. The second my brain accepted that it was real enough to be seen, a wave of fear hit me so hard it felt like it filled the entire room. It wasn't a slow build. It was instant dread, the kind of dread that makes you feel small and trapped. It was like my body understood danger before my mind could form an explanation. I didn't think, maybe I'm dreaming. I didn't think, maybe it's a prank. I didn't think, what could that be? I just felt fear. I pulled the covers over my head. That's such a kid thing to do, but it's also such an honest thing. When you're that young and something impossible is in your room, the blanket becomes your only defense. It's ridiculous in reality, but in the moment it feels like the only way to create a barrier. Like if you can't see it, it can't see you. Like you can hide from it the way you hide from a monster in a story. I remember my hands shaking as I yanked the covers up, and I remember the feeling of my heart beating too fast, like it was trying to escape my chest. Under the covers, the fear didn't go away. It actually got worse, because then my imagination had room to run. I could still picture that pale green glow hovering out there, and I didn't know if it was moving closer or staying still. I didn't know if it was watching me or if it was just floating like a weird mistake in the air. That uncertainty is what makes fear so heavy. It isn't just the thing itself. It's the fact that you don't know what it wants, and you don't know what happens next. I tried to yell for my parents. I remember trying so hard. I remember pulling in breath and trying to force my voice out, because in your mind, calling for your parents is the ultimate safety move. If you can get them into the room, the scary thing won't be allowed to stay. If adults show up, reality returns. That was the logic of childhood. But when I tried to yell, I could barely make a whisper. My voice was there, but it was thin and broken, like fear had tied it in a knot. I tried again and again, whispering desperately, but it didn't come out the way I needed it to. It felt like my throat was locked, like my body refused to make noise because noise might attract whatever was out there. It's strange to explain, but I remember the frustration of it as much as the fear, that horrible feeling of trying to call for help and realizing your own body won't cooperate. I don't remember exactly how the night ended. I don't remember if I fell asleep under the covers from sheer exhaustion or if the glow faded away. I don't remember if I eventually managed to call for my parents or if I stayed quiet because I was too terrified to move. What I do remember is the image of that pale green orb in the middle of my room and the way that fear felt in my body, like it poured into me and stayed there. It was the kind of childhood fear that doesn't fade into a funny memory. It becomes a private thing you keep to yourself because it sounds too strange to say out loud. For years, that's what it was. A story I carried around but didn't share much because it felt too weird and too specific. When you're a kid, you might mention something like that once and get laughed at or dismissed, and then you learn to keep it in your own head. So I grew up with the memory tucked away, still vivid, still unsettling, but not something that came up often in conversation. Then years later, when I was in my early 20s, we were at a family gathering. It was one of those normal events where everyone is sitting around, talking, eating, laughing, and stories start getting shared the more comfortable people get. Somehow, the conversation drifted into spooky things. The kind of topic that comes up when you're swapping childhood memories or talking about strange experiences, where people tell stories and everyone reacts, and you're half laughing and half getting chills. That's when I told everyone about the orb. I didn't make it dramatic. I just described what I remembered. Waking up in second grade, seeing a pale green glowing ball about the size of a volleyball float out of my closet and hover in the middle of my room, feeling overwhelming dread, pulling the covers over my head, trying to call out, but only being able to whisper. I remember thinking people might brush it off or tease me or say, "Oh, you probably dreamed it." I was older now, and I could handle that. I told it more like a weird childhood experience that still bothered me, not like I was trying to convince anyone of anything. But then my uncle, my mom's brother, got this look on his face. It was immediate. His expression changed the way someone's expression changes when they recognize something that hits too close. Like the story had reached into him and pulled on something he'd buried. He stared at me for a second, and then he said, "You saw it too?" The "too" is what made the room feel colder. Because suddenly it wasn't just my story anymore. It wasn't just a memory from my childhood that could be blamed on dreaming, imagination, or the way kids misinterpret things in the dark. My uncle was reacting like I had just described something he already knew, something he had experienced himself. He explained that he and my mom had lived in that same house for a few years when they were kids. My grandfather owned it back then. Later, when my parents got married, my grandfather sold the house to them. So the house had stayed in the family, passed down in a way that made it feel normal and familiar, like a safe place tied to family history. And the detail that made my skin prickle was the one that came next. My old room had been his room. Room, same closet, same space. Apparently, the exact same thing had happened to him when he was a kid, roughly around the same age I was when it happened to me. A glowing ball, floating out of the closet, hovering in the room, the same kind of fear, the same impossible image. He didn't describe some completely different phenomenon or something vague that could be forced to match. He reacted like it was the same thing, like I had just put words to something he'd known for years, but never expected to hear from someone else. That moment at the family gathering changed the entire shape of my memory. It took it from being this lonely childhood fear to being something shared, something echoed, something that had happened in the same place to two different people, decades apart. It also explained why it stuck with me so hard. It wasn't just that it was scary. It was that it felt real enough to imprint itself. And then years later, someone else confirmed it in a way you can't easily ignore. After he said that, I remember looking at my mom differently too, because it meant she grew up in that house, knowing something strange might happen there. Even if she never saw it herself, her brother did. And then later her own child slept in that room and saw it too. That's the kind of family detail that makes you wonder what else was in that house that people didn't talk about. What other little experiences got dismissed or swallowed because nobody wanted to sound crazy? How many families have a house story like that, but only connect the dots years later at a dinner table when someone finally says it out loud? What still gets me is how specific it was. Not I felt weird in that room. Not I saw a shadow once. A glowing pale green orb floating out of the closet, hovering in the middle of the room. That image is so distinct that it's hard to believe two people would independently imagine the same thing in the same space at the same age. And the fact that my uncle reacted with surprise, not with teasing or disbelief, made it feel even more real. He wasn't trying to one-up me or turn it into a joke. He looked shaken, like hearing my story stirred up his own fear again. I don't know what it was. I've never been able to name it. Some people would say ball lightning, but that explanation doesn't fit neatly with the way it moved and hovered. And it doesn't explain why it would appear inside a bedroom closet in the middle of the night. Some people would say it was a dream, but the fear I remember felt physical, and the detail was too sharp. And then there's my uncle's story matching it. Some people would say it was something paranormal, some kind of presence or energy tied to the house or the room. I can't prove that either. All I can say is what happened and what my uncle confirmed. And honestly, the confirmation is the part that haunts me more than the orb itself, because it means whatever it wasn't just a one-time weird event. It had a pattern. It returned. It chose the same space and the same kind of moment and showed itself to two kids in the same family years apart. That makes it harder to shrug off, harder to file away as childhood imagination. It makes it feel like the house held something that occasionally slipped through. Something that didn't care who was living there, only that someone was sleeping in that room at the right age to notice it. Even now, when I think back to that night in second grade, I can still feel that dread, like a shadow that creeps up your spine. I can still picture the pale green glow in the dark. And I can still hear my uncle's voice at that family gathering, that sudden shock. You saw it too, because that was the moment my childhood fear stopped being a private nightmare and became a shared family. Mystery that nobody has ever been able to explain. When my son was still tiny, somewhere in that blurry newborn stretch between 1 month and 3 months old, we lived in a house that had been built in the 1800s. I didn't know much about its history back then, and I wasn't walking around trying to convince myself it was haunted. But the feeling in that house was always the same, steady and hard to ignore. It had this spooky atmosphere where even when you were alone, you never fully felt alone. It wasn't like you were constantly seeing things or hearing loud bangs every night. It was more subtle than that, and honestly, that's what made it worse. It was the feeling of presence, like there was always something just outside your awareness. The kind of feeling that makes you walk a little faster down a hallway without knowing why, or makes you turn a light on even if you weren't planning to. The kind of place where quiet doesn't feel peaceful. It feels watchful. When you have a newborn, your world shrinks down to a few repeated moments. Feeding, burping, changing, rocking, trying to sleep, getting up again. Day and night blur together. You're tired in a way that isn't just, I stayed up late. You're tired all the way into your bones. The house is mostly dark and silent at night, and you're often sitting alone in a room while everyone else sleeps. That kind of life already makes you feel a little on edge because you're half awake all the time, always listening for the baby, always ready to respond. So in a house that already felt spooky, those late night hours could feel extra heavy. Everything feels bigger at 3 a.m. Shadows look deeper, sounds travel farther. Even normal house noises can make you pause and listen. One night, around 3 a.m., I was up feeding my son. I can still picture the scene clearly because it's one of those moments that gets stamped into your memory in a way the other late nights don't. I wasn't in a cozy nursery or tucked into a bed. I was sitting on a dining chair, probably because it was just the easiest spot at the time, or maybe because I didn't want to risk falling asleep in bed while feeding. The dining room had that hard. Plain field dining rooms often have at night, especially when you're sitting there alone. You're surrounded by furniture instead of softness, and the room feels more open and exposed. The table was right in front of me, and I was holding my son in my arms, focusing on him, doing what you do as to parent at that hour. Just trying to get through the feeding and keep everything calm and quiet. On the other side of the dining table, my husband's computer was sitting there. It was completely off. Not sleeping, not on a screensaver, not half awake. Off. The room wasn't full of glowing electronics or background noise. It was quiet. That computer was just a dark object in the room, like part of the furniture. I knew it was off because I could see it. No little lights, no hum, no screen glow. And I knew the only way to turn it on was to physically push the button on the top of the monitor. It wasn't like a laptop that might wake up on its own, or a device that could be accidentally nudged. It was the kind of thing you had to reach for and press. I was feeding my son and looking at him the way you do. Because when they're that little, you watch their face constantly. You notice everything. You notice their breathing, their tiny movements, their eyes, and then suddenly, without any warning, my son's eyes changed in a way I still can't fully explain. It wasn't a normal baby thing like looking at a light or staring off into space. His eyes immediately focused on something over my shoulder, and it was so fast and so intentional that it made my stomach tighten. It felt like his attention was grabbed by something that wasn't me. I froze without meaning to. I kept feeding him, but my body went still. Parents learn quickly that babies react to your tension, so part of me was trying to stay calm, but another part of me was instantly alert. I didn't hear anything. I didn't see anything in my peripheral vision, but my son was staring past me like there was someone right there. Then his eyes started moving. They tracked as if he was following something walking around me and the dining table. Not a quick dart of the eyes, not a random baby wiggle. His gaze moved smoothly, like it had a path, like he was watching a figure move from one point to another. It started over my shoulder, then shifted gradually, the way your eyes follow a person walking across a room. And I remember sitting there feeling my skin go cold, because I couldn't ignore how deliberate it looked. It was as if he was watching someone circle around, as if something was walking behind me, around my chair, and along the edge of the table. I didn't turn around right away. That's the part that makes me feel weird when I look back on it, because you'd think your instinct would be to whip your head around and check. But fear doesn't always make you move. Sometimes it locks you in place. I was holding my newborn. It was 3 a.m. The house already felt like it carried something I didn't want to acknowledge, and my son's eyes were telling me something was there, even though my ears and my own eyes weren't. Stuck feeling spun between not wanting to see anything and needing to know what my baby was reacting to. His eyes kept tracking until they shifted toward the computer. And the moment he looked in that direction, The computer immediately turned on, not slowly, not with a delayed wake-up. Immediately, like a switch had been flipped. The screen came alive, the power light came on. The whole thing did that unmistakable, I'm booting up behavior. In the dark, that sudden glow is startling on its own. It changes the entire room in an instant. 1 second, you're in a dim, quiet dining room, and the next second, there's this bright rectangle of light cutting through the darkness. But it wasn't just startling because it lit up. It was terrifying because of the timing. It was perfectly timed to the moment. My son looked toward it, as if whatever he was watching had moved right up to the computer and pressed the button. I felt my heart kick up so hard, it was like it punched my ribs. I remember my hands tightening around my son, not squeezing him, but holding him closer instinctively, like the way you pull someone in when you want to protect them. My brain immediately tried to explain it away, because that's what brains do when something threatens your sense of reality. Maybe it was a power surge. Maybe the computer had been updating. Maybe it wasn't fully off. Maybe some setting made it wake. I ran through those explanations so fast it was like a deck of cards flipping in my mind. But the problem was, I knew that computer. I knew it was off. I knew the only way to turn it on was to physically push the button on the top of the monitor. It wasn't voice activated. It wasn't motion activated. It wasn't something you could turn on from across the room with a remote. Someone had to press that button. And the way my son's eyes moved before it happened made it feel like more than coincidence. It felt like he watched something walk around the table. And then, at the exact moment his gaze landed on the computer responded. That sequence is what makes the memory so hard to shake. If the computer had just turned on randomly one night, I might have shrugged it off as a weird electronic hiccup. If my baby had stared into space and then nothing happened, I might have chalked it up to babies doing baby things. But both together, in that exact order, in that spooky old house at 3 a.m., felt like a complete story playing out in front of me. I sat there for a moment feeling like I couldn't breathe properly, like the air in the room had thickened. I remember looking at my son's face, still feeding, still trying to stay calm for him. But my whole body was buzzing with adrenaline. I wanted to get up and leave the room immediately, but I also didn't want to move too suddenly and upset him. I didn't want to startle him into crying, because crying at 3 a.m. in a spooky house makes everything feel worse. I wanted the room to go back to normal, but it couldn't. The computer was on, the glow was there, and my mind was now full of the image of something moving around me that I couldn't see. I wish I could tell you I did something brave in that moment, like I got up and checked every corner, or I marched around and proved nothing was there. But the truth is, when something like that happens, you don't become a hero. You become a person trying to get through the next minute. I remember wanting to be anywhere else. I remember wanting my husband awake, wanting another adult presence in the house so I wasn't the only one holding the reality of what just happened. I remember thinking how unfair it was that the house already felt like that, and now it had done something that made the feeling feel justified. Even after the feeding was done, the memory didn't fade. I carried it around like a weight. It's been almost a decade now, and it still freaks me out whenever I remember it, because it wasn't a vague, I felt creep out moment. It was specific. It had steps. My son's eyes focused on something over my shoulder. They tracked movement around the dining table. He looked toward the computer. The computer turned on immediately. It was like watching cause and effect play out without any visible cause. Sometimes I think about how babies look at things we don't notice. People always say babies stare at corners or smile at empty space. Most of the time, that's just babies being babies, learning how to focus, noticing light and shadows, reacting to tiny movements that adults ignore. I know that. I'm not someone who wants to label every strange moment as paranormal. But that night, it didn't feel like a random baby stare. It felt like attention. It felt like tracking. And it felt like something responded. What makes it stick is the feeling of being alone in that moment. It was 3 a.m. The house was quiet. I was sitting in a dining chair with my newborn in my arms, and the only other presence in the room, besides me and my baby, seemed to be something I couldn't see. That's a helpless feeling because you can't fight what you can't identify. You can't reason with it. You can't even be sure what you're afraid of, yet your body reacts anyway. Even now, when I picture it, I can still see the dining table, the dark monitor across from me, my baby's eyes snapping to a point over my shoulder as if something had entered the room. I can still feel the way my skin prickled when his gaze moved, and I can still feel the shock of that sudden screen glow, like the room had been touched by a hand that wasn't mine. It's one of those memories that doesn't become less scary with time. It just becomes more haunting, because the years pile up and nothing ever happens again to explain it, or repeat it, or make it make sense. It remains this single, sharp moment that sits there on its own, refusing to be filed away neatly. And maybe that's why it still bothers me, because it felt like proof of the feeling the house always gave me, that you were never really alone even when you were alone. That night, sitting there with my newborn at 3 a.m., it felt like the house showed me exactly what that feeling meant. And then it went quiet again, as if nothing had happened, leaving me to carry the fear and the question for the next decade. I had a sleepover at my best friend's place when we were both in our 20s. The kind of casual sleepover that doesn't feel like a sleepover the way it does when you're a kid, but still ends up being the same thing. You hang out late, talk about everything and nothing, maybe watch something on TV, snack, laugh, and eventually you crash wherever there's space. It was comfortable because it was her house, a place I'd been to plenty of times, and she was my best friend, so I wasn't on edge or expecting anything weird. It was just one of those nights where you're tired enough to sleep hard and wake up feeling like you have been dropped back into the world. I slept on the couch. It wasn't in a tucked away corner either. The couch was positioned so that when you lay there, you had a direct line of sight down her hallway to the bedrooms. You know how some houses are laid out where the living room opens into a long hallway like a straight tunnel with doors at the end and along the sides? It was like that. From where my head was on the couch, if I looked up, I could see straight down that hallway without anything blocking the view. During the day, it was just a normal hallway. At night, with the lights off and the house quiet, it felt like a long, dark passage leading to unknown rooms. Not in a haunted way necessarily, just in that way any hallway looks different at night when it's lit only by faint ambient light and your eyes are half asleep. I went to bed normally. I didn't have nightmares beforehand. I didn't wake up repeatedly. I was out, the kind of deep sleep where you don't remember drifting off at all. That's why what happened next felt so jarring, because it wasn't like I woke up slowly and started imagining shapes in the dark. I woke up out of a dead sleep around 4 a.m. It was instant. My eyes opened and I was awake in that sharp, alert way that usually only happens when something pulls you out of sleep. I sat up on the couch without even thinking, like my body moved first and my mind followed. I remember feeling that strange stillness you get at that hour, when everything in a house is quiet, like the air itself is paused. There was no TV sound, no voices, no movement, just darkness and the faint sense of being in someone else's home. The first thing I did was look down the hall, and at the end of it, there was a woman, not a vague shape, not a shadow that could be a coat on a chair. A woman standing there in a way that made my brain register person immediately. She was at the far end of the hallway, where the bedroom doors were, and she was visible enough that my sleepy mind didn't have to guess what I was looking at. She wasn't crouched or peeking. She was just there, upright like someone who belonged in the space. For a split second, my brain tried to do that normal thing it does, where it reaches for an explanation that fits reality. I thought maybe it was my friend, or her mom, getting up for water, checking on something, going to the bathroom. It would have made sense to see someone in a hallway at night. People get up, houses creak, doors open. But something about this woman didn't feel like a normal household movement. It felt too calm, too silent. And the timing was too perfect, like she was placed there for me to see. She looked at me for a second. That's the part that made my stomach drop, because it wasn't like I was staring down the hallway and seeing someone who didn't notice me. She met my gaze. It wasn't a casual glance like someone would do if they saw you sitting up and thought, "Oh, you're awake." It felt more like acknowledgement, like she knew I was looking, and she returned it without surprise. Then she turned and walked through one of the bedroom doors. She didn't walk toward me. She didn't rush away. She didn't run like she'd been caught. She turned as if she had somewhere to go, and simply continued her path. And she didn't reach for the doorknob or do anything that looked like opening it. She just walked through it, like the door wasn't a solid barrier at all. I heard the door open and close. That sound was so real to me in the moment that it's one of the clearest pieces of the memory. The little click, the movement, the soft close, except the door itself never moved. From where I was sitting, I could see the door, and it stayed still. No swing, no shift, no change in how it sat in the frame. But I heard it open and shut as if it had physically moved. And then the hallway was empty again. The whole thing happened quickly, but not so quickly that it felt like a blink. It felt like a full sequence. Wake up, sit up, see a woman, make eye contact, watch her turn, watch her walk through a door, hear the door, see the hallway go empty. And the entire time, I was sitting there on the couch with my heart pounding harder and harder, trying to make my brain catch up to what my eyes had just shown me. For a moment, I didn't move. I didn't scream. I didn't jump off the couch and run down the hallway. I just sat there, frozen, because that's what fear does sometimes. It makes you still. It makes you listen. It makes you question whether you're awake. I remember the feeling of trying to decide if I had actually opened my eyes or if I was half dreaming. But I was awake enough to sit up, awake enough to look down the hall, awake enough to hear the door sound. It didn't feel like a dream scene. It felt like a quiet event that happened in a real house in real darkness. Eventually, I lay back down, but I didn't sleep normally after that. I kept looking down the hallway, checking it, waiting to see her again. Every tiny house noise made me tense up. I didn't want to wake the whole house in the middle of the night over something I couldn't prove, but I also didn't want to pretend it hadn't happened. So I did what a lot of people do in those moments. I waited for morning. The next day, when it was light and normal again, I told my friend about it. I expected her to laugh it off or tell me I had been dreaming. I expected that uncomfortable little joke people make when they don't really believe you, but they don't want to be rude either. I expected to feel embarrassed for bringing it up. So I told her carefully, trying not to sound dramatic, just laying out what I saw and what time it was and how real it felt. And her response knocked the air out of me. She didn't laugh. She didn't act surprised that I'd said something weird. She didn't say, "You were dreaming." She just reacted like I had finally noticed something that was already part of the house. She said, in this calm, almost matter-of-fact way, "Oh, so you saw the woman." Then she explained that she and her mom see the woman too, and her dad and her brother always see a little girl. That detail made my skin prickle, because it meant this wasn't just some random one-off story in their family. It wasn't like, "Oh yeah, I once thought I saw something." It was a pattern, a shared thing. Something multiple people in the house had seen over time, consistently enough that they could casually label it. The woman. The little girl. Like they were unofficial roommates everyone had learned to live around. The strangest part to me was the split. Me and her mom see the woman. Dad and brother see the little girl. That kind of division is eerie because it suggests the phenomenon had its own rules, like it chose who it showed itself to, or it presented different faces to different people. It also makes you wonder what the woman and the little girl were doing, whether they were connected, whether it was the same presence appearing in different forms, or whether there were truly two separate figures tied to the house. I asked questions, of course. I wanted details. How often? Where do you see her? Does she speak? Does she do anything? Do you ever feel scared? And the way my friend talked about it made it sound like it was just there. Like it was part of the background of life in that house. Not something that happened every night, but something that happened enough that they were used to it. Something they occasionally mentioned. Sometimes with chills, sometimes with a shrug. Because what else do you do when you can't change it and it isn't actively hurting you? As far as I know, they're still there, the woman and the little girl. My friend told me they still see them sometimes. Not always, not on command. Just every now and then, like the house decides to remind you that you're not fully alone, even when you think you are. And that's what stayed with me more than anything, the normal way she said it. The way she treated it like a known fact, because that's what turned my experience from being a scary personal moment into something bigger. It meant I hadn't just woken up and imagined a figure in the dark. I had seen the same woman her and her mom had seen. I had stepped into a story that was already ongoing, like a book that had been opened long before I walked into the room. Even now, when I picture that night, I can still see the hallway as a long, dark line from the couch, and that woman at the end of it, standing still for a second, as if she was deciding whether to let me see her. I can still feel the sudden jolt of fear when she looked back at me. I can still hear that door sound, that impossible open and close noise that didn't match what my eyes witnessed. It's the kind of experience that would be easy to doubt if you were alone in it. But the moment my friend confirmed it, the doubt turned into something else. Not certainty, exactly, because you can never be fully certain about things like this, but a different kind of unsettled knowing. Like the house had its own inhabitants, and that night at 4 a.m., I happened to wake up at the exact moment one of them was walking down the hall.
If you've stayed with me this far, then these stories didn't simply pass the time. They stayed with you. Everything you heard tonight was real. Real people. Real moments. And in each one, something quietly slipped out of place. If you'd like more of the kind that don't let go so easily, subscribe to Crowvane Manor. There are more rooms left open and more stories waiting behind every door. I'm grateful you spent this part of your night here. Rest well, and I'll be waiting when you return.